A warm welcome to Elimu TV English lesson. Today we have an interesting lineup. We're going to talk about verbs. It will be a Form 2 lesson. But before we start our lesson, I'd kindly request you to follow us or contact us through our SMS number is 40007. Our Facebook page is Elimu TV and our Twitter handle is at ElimuTV_KE. I am your teacher, Sally Ngware. We move to our lesson today. We're going to talk about verbs. Specifically, we are going to deal with auxiliary verbs. But before then, let's look at our lesson's objectives or what will be expected of you by the end of this lesson. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to define verbs. We have been doing that. By the end of lesson, you also be expected to give examples of verbs. You should also be able to define auxiliary verbs. You should be able to identify auxiliary verbs from sentences. And our last objective is that you should be able to use the correct form auxiliary verbs in various forms of sentences. Now let's start by introducing our lesson. We have previously looked at verbs and we have said that verbs are action words or words that denote actions or that show the state of being. Verbs are words that denote actions or that show the state of being. Let's look at examples of verbs. We have sentence 1. We have Judy is a bright girl. The verb there is, and is not an action word, but it expresses the state of being. Number 2, we have he escaped through the window. Escaped is an action word. And number 3, we have most schools open today. Open is a verb. We are saying that a verb is a doing word or an action word or a word that shows state of being. What about auxiliary verbs? An auxiliary verb is a helping verb. When there is more than one verb in a sentence, one of the verbs is the main verb, while the other one is a helping verb, otherwise known as an auxiliary verb. Let's look at examples of auxiliary verbs. Sentence 1. Derek will cook dinner today. The main verb in that sentence is cook. But alongside cook, we have another verb which is will, and we are saying that an auxiliary verb is a helping verb. So the verb will in sentence 1 is the auxiliary verb. It is helping the verb cook. We'll look at the functions of auxiliary verbs as we move on, but as for now, let us look at the main verb and the auxiliary verb. Sentence number 2, we have, it looks as if it will rain in the afternoon. We have the main verb rain, of course being helped by the auxiliary verb will. So will in that sentence is an auxiliary verb, or it is a helping verb. Number 3, we have been coming to school late. There we have 3 verbs following each other. We have, been, coming. The main verb is coming, and we have and been as the 2 auxiliary verbs in that sentence. Number 4, we have the government's laptop project has kicked off. We have the main verb kicked, and we have the helping verb, also known as auxiliary verb, has. Now, let's continue and look at the 2 classifications of auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs can be primary auxiliary verbs or modal auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs can either be primary auxiliary verbs or they can be modal auxiliary verbs. What function do an auxiliary verb perform in a sentence? Or what are the functions of auxiliary verbs? Both modal and primary auxiliary verbs help in the following three ways. Number one, tense. An auxiliary verb can be used in a sentence to show tense. Let's look at number one. Example number one, we have Jude will report to work on Thursday. Jude will report to work on Thursday. If you look at that sentence, we have the main verb report, and the helping verb or the auxiliary verb is will. So the verb will is showing the tense of the verb report. In this case, will is a future tense. So Jude did not report to work yesterday. Jude will not report to work today, but Jude will report to work tomorrow. So the tense of the verb report has been shown by the auxiliary verb will. We are saying that the first function of an auxiliary verb is to show tense in sentences. Let's look at the use number 2, and we have questions. Auxiliary verbs help us form questions. We have the example, do you like bananas? Do you like bananas? The auxiliary do and the main verb like have been used on this sentence. Like is a main verb and do is an auxiliary verb that is being used to form a question, do you like bananas? That's the second function of auxiliary verbs. We have number 3. We have negatives of sentences. We form negatives of sentences or questions that have the word not using auxiliary verbs. Let's look at number 1. Have you not visited the city today? The main verb is visited, and if you want to form the negative form of that sentence, you have you not? Otherwise shortened to form haven't you visited the city before? So having the main verb visited and you want to form the negative form of have you visited the city before, which is a question. If you want to form the negative of that question, or if you want to form the negative of the question, have you visited the city before, you have not coming before the main verb, and that will form the negative, haven't you visited the city before. So those are the 3 functions of auxiliary verbs in sentences. And there are 3 types of primary auxiliary verbs. Today we are going to look at the primary auxiliary verbs. Later we look at the modal auxiliary verbs. And we have 3 verbs in auxiliary verbs. And the first one is be, do, and have. These are the 3 primary auxiliary verbs. Be, do, and have. Now, these 3 forms have their different forms, of course, depending on tense and on a number, either singular or plural. Let's start with the verb be. And when you talk about the auxiliary verb be, it can take those forms on your screen. We have the first one, which is be. We have is, are, was, were, been, and been. If you may look at sentences that can be formed by these primary auxiliary verbs of the form be, or the various forms of the verb be, we have number 1, Joan will be waiting for you. I am joining them now. Is, Orange is the leading network provider in Kenya. Are, we are all Kenyans. Was, he was born in January 1991. Were, the striking workers were dispersed by the anti-riot police. Been, Norman is being taken home later. been, they have been hiding in the caves. So those are the three forms of the verb be or of the auxiliary verb be. Let's look at the next auxiliary verb. We have do, and do has or takes three forms. We have do itself, does, and did. Do singular, does plural, did past tense. So when you talk about do, you're talking about one item. When you talk about does, you're talking about many items. And when you talk about did, you're talking about past or an activity or a verb that took place in the past. Let's look at example 1. Do, I don't know the owner of the car. Does he know that her house has been broken into? Did, they didn't fail the exam. Next, we have the auxiliary verb have. Again, it takes three forms. Have for the plural, has for the singular, and had for the past tense. Example of a sentence using have. I have been writing poems. Has, she has been here. Had, if we had that sentence, it would be maybe they had come late, or any other sentence that could be formed by the auxiliary verb had. Of course, these should be in the past tense. Let's have your assignment for the day. Use the correct form of the auxiliary verbs discussed in this lesson to fill in the blank spaces. Use the correct form of the auxiliary verbs discussed in this lesson to fill in the blank spaces. Number 1. What dash you doing when she arrived? That could be a form of the word be, of course, in its past tense. So if I could assist you with number 1, it would be, what were you doing when she arrived? Number 2, the guests dash in the sitting room, yet the food is not ready. The verb is on the last part of this sentence should assist you know that you're talking about present continuous form or the present tense. So the only maybe possible answer in number 2 would be the guests are in the sitting room, yet the food is not ready. Number 3, they dash several letters to the court, but dash replied to any. They dash several letters to the court, but dash replied to any. So maybe we could have the answer. They wrote several letters to the court, but it replied. Assignment. Use the correct form of the auxiliary verbs discussed in this lesson to fill in the blank spaces. Use the correct form of the auxiliary verbs discussed in this lesson to fill in the blank spaces. Number 1, if I could assist you with number 1, what dash you doing when she arrived? That could be, what were you doing when she arrived? Number 2, the guests dash in the sitting room, yet the food is not ready. The verb is should help you know that you're talking about present tense. So the possible answer in that number 2 is the guests are in the sitting room, yet the food is not ready. So attempt the other 3. Remember, it's auxiliary verbs, not any other form of verbs that you'll be using to fill in those brackets. Request you to talk to us. We want to know how you feel about the lessons. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, Contact us. Our SMS number is 40007, or you can call us on 0726 842644. Once again, 0726 842644. You can follow our Facebook page, Elimu TV, or you can follow us on Twitter at Elimu_KA. I have been your teacher, Salingware. Always a pleasure to teach you. Till next lesson, keep it Elimu TV.